Hey everyone, I'm Evan the Counselor, and welcome to another episode of Evan the Counselor Live. So today we will be having a guest, Paula Epstein, who also happens to be my aunt, and she is an end-of-life doula. So we're going to be talking all about death, dying, and the hospice process, as that's where she has worked and volunteered for a long period of time. So we are also streaming live on TikTok. So for all the TikTok folks here who are streaming in, feel free. We encourage you to post questions, anything regarding hospice, end-of-life care, and so as we continue the conversation, we'll be checking in on you as well. So as a reminder, our podcast is sponsored by Vibe Interior. They hook me up with all the canvases that I have at my place that you could see in my videos that people ask about all the time. So they have canvases that come shipped, framed. They have an awesome selection. So code Evan40 at checkout, you get $40 off. So go check them out. So yeah, before we get going, also I am giving out free copies of my book, The Communication Formula, for those who are subscribing on YouTube and Instagram. So if you send me an email, all those links are in my link tree in my bio, and I will go ahead and send you over the copy of my book before we send that over to publishers. So why don't we just jump right into it? So today again we have special guest Paula Epstein, who is my aunt as well, full disclosure, and she is a end-of-life doula, and so we're hearing a lot more about that, and I've seen that come up in a lot of different areas of being a doula, and your daughter is becoming one as well, right, for nursing, or is that
A
birthing doula, right? So I guess just right off the bat, before we jump in, what is that? Where does that word come from? What is a doula, and why is this becoming so popular? Or is that just my imagination?
No, a doula comes from the Greek. It says women who serve. And what it is it provides a service.
Yeah.
And the end of life doula, which is something that has started since 2000. So it's a relatively new profession. And what that does, it's a non-medical approach
Okay.
to people, patients, and their families with end-of-life issues. So people
Hmm.
who are dying. And so what we do is we provide various services. Each doula provides certain services depending on their skill sets. And we can discuss that later, especially if you're choosing to hire a doula. You may want to know what are some of the specific services that they will they will provide for you.
Okay. Okay, so that's really interesting. So it sounds like there's a very long history of this, going back to Greek times, or is that just the
Well,
word?
that term, the service part of it.
Mm,
Remember, midwives and birth doulas
mm.
have gone back further than that. There's been, in history. A death doula is something that is relatively new. So it's
Okay.
like you're a coach.
Okay, so that's a good way to look at it. So like you're a coach, through some of these more complicated medical. And what is like the advantage of that? What spaces do you all fill that you can't get from just going to your doctor or medical? What, because you said it was a non-medical approach. What are the advantages of having a coach, opposed to just having your medical care?
There are several. First of all, we live in a global society, so family and friends may not be near the person who
Mm,
has a chronic illness.
yeah.
So you may want to have someone will help provide certain services for you. For example, you may want them to accompany them and take them to a doctor's appointment, take the notes, because when you yourself go to a doctor, you hear things, but you don't always process everything.
Hmm.
So you have a note taker there. So that is one example. Will they provide pet services when perhaps the ill person is unable to walk their pet, feed them, clean out their, cat litter,
Hmm.
things like that. So pet services, some shopping, cooking. So
Okay.
some very practical things that we do, and we can certainly discuss some of the legacy types of things that a doula will provide. Another thing is that they can act just like some of us hospice people do as a mediator between the family and their
Mm-hmm.
loved one. Because, as you know, in family dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
just because someone is actively dying,
Yeah.
that doesn't mean everything has been resolved and your
Yeah.
issues don't magically disappear. So sometimes, and I've had numerous experiences. I've been a hospice volunteer for over 25 years, where we have mediated different types of family issues.
Okay.
And,
As an
and the
intermediate.
main thing is that we provide, the patient is key,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to give a holistic approach to dealing with the family, the patient, and death and
So it
dying.
sounds like you fill in a lot of the gaps that the medical cannot provide, right? You fill in a lot of the gaps, but you said very practical. And that's something that people don't always think about, right? So you're a bit ahead of the game, right? Like pet services, shopping, right? People don't always realize it until they're in that situation where they have a family member who's passing away. They don't realize how much there is, and maybe you're getting them to think about and assisting them in those considerations.
You're absolutely correct, and that's why I said it's a psycho-social, spiritual,
Hmm.
approach, and I think that's key.
Yeah, I can
And
see the
also,
value.
I noticed someone online
Mm.
is also a hospice practitioner.
Yeah.
What we also do is that you're wonderful, and I love every one of them. The
Hmm.
organization that I've worked with for years,
Hmm.
I marvel at them. However, you cannot provide the time
Yeah.
to give to them. We
Mm.
provide the time.
Ah,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
And we fill in.
Well, yeah, and I mean, for someone who's a nurse practitioner, everything is very specific medical billing. The services that you're providing, they can't, know one person, unless, and that's not like covered under the medical system, right? I mean, there's.
Um, well, I'm a little confused. Do you mean hospice or end of life doula?
Oh, I was talking about with like hospice with someone who's like a nurse practitioner, right? They can only bill certain medical
Oh,
codes. They're not able to take that
uh,
holistic approach, in a hospice hospital setting where someone who's a coach or a doula, they're able to provide more the in-home and.
I'm going to slightly disagree with that.
Okay, I'm just
Yeah,
asking. I don't
yeah,
know.
because hospice can be done in a lot of different
Yeah, in the home
settings,
setting too.
right?
Yeah.
And the practitioner, she may be working, or he may
Mm.
be working on a unit or, for an organization. So the billing, let's not think about for a
Yeah.
moment. What they do is provide all of these additional services, but
Yeah.
it's primarily physical. I mean, they do provide
Yeah.
emotional support,
Hmm.
etc. But we kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's very cool. So backing up a little bit, how did you get into this area? Yeah, so how did you go from where you started to being an end of life dual? Like how did that come about? And for everyone who's just joining us on TikTok Live, we have Paula Epstein, who is a end of life doula. So we're talking about like holistic death, dying, helping family members. And so if you have any questions, feel free to. We'll be checking the stream.
Okay. Um, well, as a college librarian, you're probably
Hmm.
wondering,
Yeah, so you
how
started
did
off
I
as a
get?
college
Yeah,
librarian.
I ended up as one too. But during that time, in the late 1990s, I always volunteered, and I think volunteerism is exceptionally important to give back to the community. And I've always volunteered in education, and you work in it. I volunteered in it. I
Hmm.
was tired. So
Yeah.
I actually answered a small ad that was in my local paper that says, "We will train you to be a hospice volunteer." And I didn't even know what that meant, hospice, because
Oh, okay.
that's not a term that was, in my sphere. And I went into a very rigorous training. I volunteered. I volunteered on a unit. I found the people incredible. I worked with them and I did a lot of hands-on work because I was shadowing these incredible hospice nurses, doctors, and CNAs. From there, I became, when I worked with this organization, which is Journey Care, they asked if they could, because I was putting in a lot of time, they asked me if I would become a CNA. So besides volunteering, I could then work for them as needed. At that point, during one summer break, I took my summer vacation and I became a certified nursing assistant. During COVID, and it was wonderful. I have retired from college and being a CNA at the same time in the same year. But and I still volunteered as a CNA. Excuse me, as a hospice volunteer. But I was also a CNA assist. So I helped with feeding, changing, bathing, etc. So I was doing that work, but I was doing it on my own hours when I wanted to do it. Uh, when COVID hit, I started to think about this, and I read an article on end of life doulas. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. So I took advantage of the time off from hospice, and I took this course. And I checked out 3 various organizations, and I took this course, and it was pretty in-depth. And I became certified at the beginning of the year as an end-of-life doula. I felt, and it has proven, that it supplements my hospice work. I've learned a lot of new things, new skill sets,
Yeah.
and I found it fascinating. Of course, during COVID, I didn't necessarily work in that, and a lot of people now have used this as a new career. I'm not doing it that way.
Yeah.
I'm just a volunteer. I volunteer my services, and I don't go do a lot of intake, but I do that in conjunction with
the volunteering.
with my volunteering at hospice. So I've answered various questions, etc. So it's by referral where I've answered questions.
So yeah, it's interesting that you just saw an ad in the paper and this was of interest. You never really heard of the term hospice, and I think a lot of people haven't. It's become more and more common, and I believe hospice care in and of itself is relatively newer, right? And there's a lot of advocacy that needed to happen, right, to have insurance and other recognize that as a discipline of medicine, right? I believe I've heard that before.
Yes, actually, hospice care, it comes from the term, if you think about it this way, hospitality. It's to give comfort.
Yeah.
And it actually started again. The modern hospice started after World War II in England. Hello, UK. It started in England with Cecily Saunders.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it came to the United States. And when I first started working in hospice, there weren't that many hospice doctors. And now it has just mushroomed, it has grown. Just in Illinois, which I'm based out of, we have close to 50 different hospice agencies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
There's, what was that like walking into, from going from not knowing what it was to starting about, like, what was that like? Was that like a big shock for you?
It was.
And
it was actually quite scary. And I says, boy, can I do this or not? But with the guidance of the people, boy, they just tossed me in, and I just followed them. I did what they did. They explained things, and I found that I could do it. And I did it, and it's been an amazing experience for me.
Yeah. Yeah. What about it surprised you going in? Like as you started to learn about?
A number of things. I think one of the major things is the fear of the term hospice. And we have that a lot. We have a lot of patients where we have been told in advance by families, do not use the H word. Don't say hospice to the patient.
Yeah.
Remember, you can have hospice in various settings.
Mm.
I work on units. I like the collaboration
Yeah.
of a group. You can have it in a nursing home, an assisted living. You can have it at home. So you can have it in a lot of different areas. And I like working on units. So one of the things is that on the unit, don't use the word hospice. And then you have the patient who at the same time says, don't tell my family I'm in hospice. And I'm going, hello, there's a disconnect here
Yeah.
because you associate hospice with dying and death.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily so. That doesn't mean it's not. To be hospice appropriate, you have to have a doctor certify that you have 6 months to live. That is an insurance issue.
Yeah.
But guess what? Don't hold them to it. We've had people in hospice for years, and people just
Wow.
can get certified every 6 months to be in compliance with
Okay.
their insurance or Medicare.
Are they on the unit that long for like 3 years?
No,
No.
they're
It's
not.
kind of they're in and out.
No.
No.
We transition them somewhere else. We stabilize them. And that's another thing, is that sometimes when people come on hospice, all of a sudden they improve. Why? Because we've now controlled their medication.
Mm-hmm.
So they're now on the appropriate medications,
Okay.
and they've improved, and they can transition to whatever. Another possibility that you could transition out of hospice is if you found that there is a new medical procedure you want to try,
Yeah.
you can opt out of hospice. So you can go in and out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not. Yes, I think people think that it's.
The minute you're on it, you're dead.
Yeah, that it's
Yeah,
just kind of
no.
the time.
No, it
Yeah,
does. I mean, it does happen, but no.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Heather here was saying, and she was the one who's the MP, saying, that they focus on symptom reduction, or at least like in her role.
Pain management. That's huge. Pain management is huge. The other thing is that your regular doctors versus a hospice doctor it's very uncomfortable, maybe very uncomfortable talking about death or even mentioning that they have, that is a true possibility.
Mm-hmm.
So discussions about death is not very comfortable or easy in our society.
Yeah, and that's kind of a question I was going to get into is, I think a lot of people don't know about this is, that it's a very taboo topic. We're not very open about it. Why do you think that is? Is it that way across all cultures? Is it more us here in Western society where it is more taboo to talk about death? And what is your thought on that?
That's kind of a difficult question, but I'll try to answer
Sure.
it. If you are religious,
Yeah.
and you think that there is a life after death,
Yeah.
not an issue. Certain cultures, certain religions, certain spiritual beliefs do believe in an afterlife.
Afterlife, yeah.
Right. Now, what happens is that a lot of cultures are very accepting of it. You have the Day of the Dead in Mexico. You have in Australia the Aboriginals who, on a death, they paint themselves white and they dance and chant and to get the spirits out. You can go into Tibet where the bodies are laid up on hills and vultures come down and peck at the bodies, and that they release the spirits of the person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go down to New Orleans where you have all the jazz musicians who give a very happy send-off to those, someone who has died. So it's varied. And there's a whole series of belief systems in terms of, death, and there's death deniers who will never accept the fact that they're going to die. They're living for now. And in history, a couple of writers would be someone like, let me think for a minute. I wanted to make sure I had this. Otto Rank, Martin Heidegger, and also you have Ernest Becker, who wrote a very interesting book on the denial of death. So you
So,
have
so
people,
these
you
are
have,
people. So what does that mean? Like they just put their head in the sand, or are they like the flat Earth
don't
people
think about
who?
it. It's not going to happen.
I mean, if you ask them, if you pin them down, what would they say? They say it's not.
I- Um, it, it's not going to happen. They don't think about it. They're living for right now.
Okay, so they know that it's going to happen. They're not like
Well,
denying
if they
that.
know it or not, they're
Yeah.
denying that aspect of it. I'm
Okay.
sure you have family members, I do too, who thought they were going to live forever. And they didn't plan properly for the eventuality that there might be an issue.
Yeah, and I would imagine in doing the work that you're doing with the doula work that I mean, those are some of the things that you talk about as well, right? End of life planning and
Yes, if
um,
asked. If asked, I can help with giving options.
mm,
I don't tell them what to do, but if they ask questions, I can give them options about what to do. Some people may want a green funeral where they're wrapped in a certain way and they go right into the earth. And I discovered a couple places
mm,
in my community that actually do that. So, you give people options. Some religions, especially in Orthodox Judaism, where they're wrapped in a shroud and they're put in a wooden casket. So there are different things that people do, but if they ask me questions, I'm glad to find out those types of resources. It's the same thing about do they want to talk to a lawyer? Do you want me to accompany you, not to give input, but to at least accompany you, perhaps to find a lawyer who can help you to make
yeah.
plans, what you have to do, because not all people are very organized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're there to
Hmm.
support, yeah, and help them ask, guide them to the right questions
Right.
that they should be asking, and not necessarily giving your input unless asked for, right?
Yeah. No, again, I give suggestions as to what are their
Yeah.
possibilities. I am non-judgmental.
Mm.
Yeah, I try not to direct.
Yep.
I listen. I'm a listening presence, and I hear what they say, and then I try to fulfill whatever their needs are and
Mm.
give them the comfort that they need to fulfill them.
Sounds yeah. And so, so I would imagine, in getting certified in this, there's a code of ethics. What are some like the notable code of ethics
Oh
for?
yeah, there is a code of ethics. I will say, because it's a new profession and something to think about, we're not nationally certified
Yeah.
like other things. However, it's boundaries, how we maintain boundaries with people, and how we conduct ourselves in a professional way. Now,
Mm.
because I'm a CNA, I may help to do some physical aspects where other end of life people won't. And remember, if for those who are doing it as a profession, they have to get liability insurance, and
Mm.
so they're adherent to whatever their insurance policies say they can and
Yeah.
cannot do.
Okay. Yeah, and for those just tuning in, we have Paula Epstein here, who is an end of life doula. And so, for those who don't know, it's kind of like a coach and coaching families through the process of having a loved one with a terminal illness or going through the dying process. So, if you have any questions, feel free to add those. Um, let's see. Yeah, so Heather said an MD, nurse practitioner, goes by the LCD qualifiers under Medicare. That's 6 months or less. Yeah, so
Hmm.
she was talking about that, and that's what constitutes, right, the technical medical
Yes.
necessity for hospice care, right, having that 6 month. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be 6 months. And like you said, people. I remember one time that I remember you and I talked about this years ago, and you were telling me about this, and I remember that like it stood out to me where you said, because I was under the assumption, I think a lot of others are on here, like you said, that it's hospice equals death, that it's a death sentence. And I asked you, does anyone ever does anyone ever come out of that? Does anyone ever like leave hospice? Well, and you're saying, well, it's a dynamic process. But then I think I kind of remember you also saying at the end, like, when you have a terminal, it's like we're all dying, but that there's no miracles in that way. I mean, I can't remember exactly what you told me, but
Yeah,
it stood out to me.
that's so much. I taught the hospice component of a class that we
Mm,
had at my college on death and dying,
mm.
and that would be the question I would
Yeah.
get at every
Oh,
session.
really?
Don't you believe in miracles? Can't it happen that someone will come out of it? And I don't mean to dissuade anyone or burst any bubbles,
Mm. But it's
but
just
I haven't
you haven't
seen it.
seen it.
No, I think the most important thing to remember is death with dignity,
Mm.
and that's just something that we strive for. Let's make this easy. Let's make this without pain
Yeah.
and as fearless as possible. Let's think of it as just going to sleep
Mm.
gently,
Yeah.
in a dignified manner. And
Mm.
that's kind of how I view things. I don't think there are miracles in that vein.
Yeah.
Not when you have a chronic illness,
Yeah.
or excuse me, a terminal illness. Chronic illnesses are palliative, and that's for another additional discussion.
Yeah. About the differences in palliative
Yeah.
care. Um, so yeah, so you mentioned that you did some teaching in college, and for those of you tuning in, that you were a librarian for years
Mm-hmm.
at a college, and then you ended up transitioning. I remember into take teaching some courses at the
Mm-hmm.
college, and then one of them. So what was that like working with college students and just the general public as far as educating them on this topic, and what surprised you of what they maybe didn't know or the questions that you would get?
It changed over the years, and by the way, I love college students.
Yeah.
I absolutely love them. That's one thing now that I've retired that I miss a lot. They're so open
Hmm.
to the things that you have to say, and if you have a open class like this one was, where you could say anything at any time,
Yeah.
it's marvelous. Uh, I think that over the years it changed. A lot of people never even heard of that term. And until finally,
Which term?
hospice.
Oh.
Never even understood that, didn't even know
Yeah.
that something like that exists. And that's wonderful that they didn't have a loved one who had died. Uh, as the years passed, I found that more and more students had a grandparent or a parent
Yeah.
who died in hospice, and they were able to relay their experience with them, with hospice and what it turned out. And they didn't understand everything. They were young, and we find that a lot with children. And we have a wonderful program called Camp Courage for ages 6 to 13,
Oh,
or
wow.
6 to 16, excuse me, who have suffered a major loss of someone loving, but that they cared for so much, and you feel different, when it's someone in your family, or perhaps you don't know how to discuss it with your parent. Just say it's a grandparent
Yeah.
that had passed away.
Yeah.
You don't want to bring up a hurtful topic to your parent. You
Mm.
don't want them to be more upset than they
Yeah.
are, so you keep it internalized.
Mm.
So what I was able to do was to answer some of the questions. At Camp Courage, the same thing happens. These young people can talk to other people,
Oh, wow.
and they already know that they're all the same. Every one of these children has suffered a loss. You're on equal grounds. You could be the only one in your class who had a loss,
Yeah.
but now you're all
You're with
equal,
other people
right?
who are
And
going
you
through it.
can do all the things that you do at a camp, plus they give you art therapy, pet therapy, you make legacy
Hmm.
boxes, things like that, and you can ask any of your questions. Like some of the questions that even came up in the class and also at Camp Courage is, what happens to the body? Does your hair still grow? Does your
Hmm.
fingernails still grow?
Do they? I hear that's
Yeah,
true. And your
well,
nose, right?
please, not the nose. No,
Brush
with your
joints.
fingernails, what happens is that the skin recedes, so the
Oh, so
nails
it's
look the
yeah.
nails look longer. So you can ask these questions that you wouldn't normally want to ask your parent or someone
Yeah.
close, because you
It's
don't
like a
want to
safe
bring out
space to
her.
do that.
It's right, and you don't want to make them more upset than they are. One, I'll never forget this. One young man came up to me afterwards. He says, my mother's a hospice nurse. I never knew what she did. I never understood it before that. And he says, oh, I'm so impressed with her. And I said, you should be. She is a marvel. So you can learn. People have learned things from that, and they were free to ask any questions. But most of the questions are there miracles?
Yeah.
Yeah, but more and more
Why do we ask that?
because you want hope. You
Yeah.
want hope that someone that you love and care for is
Yeah.
not going to die.
Yeah, after
You
getting
want
that
you want them with you, whether it's for selfish purposes or for your own emotional needs. And you don't want to see that person who you love suffer
Yeah.
and die and leave you.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, and I think that makes sense as to one of the reasons why the topic of death is so taboo is we're all afraid of it. I mean, maybe some aren't, but some people are more at peace, and some people are, religious reasons, right? They don't have that fear. But I think even for those folks, they'd have to admit, maybe there's a shred of doubt of whatever their belief is. There's a 1% chance there isn't a heaven, or what is it going to look like? Or fear of leaving what they have now. And again, we're the only species, at least that we know of, that knows for sure we're going to die. And as for someone from my perspective who's doing therapy with people, how much of our collective neuroses, and how much of it has to be about everything that we do has to have this presupposition under it that I'm going to die. This is temporary, right? Like the way we live our lives, the way we make decisions about what we do in life is knowing that it's fleeting and it's temporary.
Yeah. I think you stated that beautifully. And that's why it's so important for people who have had a loss to get grief therapy if needed. I'll never forget, and it's so cute, with my father when he was actively dying, I said, Dad, don't leave me. I need you here. He says, too bad. And if you knew my friend, and
My grandfather,
if you
yes.
knew Grampy, yeah, he said,
Tough shit.
yeah, he said that's right. Yeah,
That's kind of his
he
motto
did
in
say
life
that.
is-
He smiled and he said naughty words.
Yeah.
He said, too bad. He says, I'm ready. He says, end of story. He says, I'm tired. I'm through. I'm not putting up with this.
Yeah, and this was, is at the end, right? So this was like very much towards the end when he was suffering with memory loss,
Oh, that
dementia.
too. That
Right.
too. Yeah, but then he had physicality where he fell and he broke his neck and there was all sorts of...
I remember. And you hear stories like that a lot of people who have memory care issues, right, with dementia, where what's interesting because like people die of Alzheimer's, and you think like, well, how does one die of memory loss? But it seems like folks who are in that position, at some point, they just decide in some
A
way.
little bit more than that. As a matter of fact, I believe that's now the 5th cause of death. Is Alzheimer's. What happens is they forget to take medicine. They forget to eat. They don't want to eat. So it's not just what you were saying, but there is some physical aspects to it. They may be a false precaution.
Yeah.
And that's what happens a lot also.
Yeah. Well, in the case of Grandpa here, he was kind of bumbling around, along. He was just doing his thing. We were taking care of him, and and he was just kind of, it was obviously very sad. He would just kind of tag along. He would say less and less.
Right. Oh, yeah, you couldn't engage him unless you had like a yes or no question, etc. The main thing, boy, you just take him out to eat, and he was just as happy as could be.
Yeah, I remember that. He would
Wanna
come
go
out
to
and
eat?
he knew.
Yeah. He was a charmer, and I miss him. And that's another thing in terms of a loss, is that you miss them so much, but they're in your heart, they're in your memory. And that's what's important to keep in there. It's not like they're lost to you. So I try to keep that in perspective. I think about him. I think about my grandma a little bit less and less. I think about my other grandparents, etc. But yeah, it's huge. And Alzheimer's is ugly. We had a really cute patient on the unit
Yeah.
who we couldn't use the word hospice around her, and she said to me, Paula, this is the best hotel I've ever been in. Because one of the things that you'll find in hospice, and people say, why can't all service be this way when you're in a hospital? We're on those call buttons virtually immediately. There is a bigger ratio of staff to patients.
Oh, wow.
So they get a lot of attention and a lot of needs. We're
That's
on
neat.
it. And she's, oh, this is the best hotel.
Can't all hotels be like this? And yeah, so for those just tuning in, we have Paula Epstein, who is a end-of-life doula. So another word for that would be a coach, would be the best way to describe. So if anyone has any questions about the hospice process, end-of-life care, a lot of interesting topics coming up. So yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating to me, like what we were talking about before with our attitudes towards it and this avoidance and this underlying fear that we all have. So what was that like for you, not just as a hospice, but as a human being, right, who has this condition as well, going into hospice? Like, what did you learn about death and your own mortality? Like, what is there a transition that happens for everyone who starts to work in a hospice or in a death setting, something that maybe is a collective, I don't know if I would say culture, but kind of like understanding that you all have that maybe other people don't? Or is it everybody is still different in some way?
I'm going to speak just for myself,
Yeah.
what I've learned. I've learned to not be so fearful. I've seen things that have been amazing. I think there's something there because I have seen people who did not leave their bed for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
All of a sudden they're out of the bed. They're talking, especially close to their the last day or two. That there's this spurt of energy, and have these long discussions, and you think, oh my God, they're going to recover, But it was this amazing spurt. So I've learned to not be so fearful. Another thing that I've really learned, and sometimes I think that hospice did more for me than I've done for them, is that I feel that I'm trying to live my life without regrets. I'm trying to do things that will also make me happy, to make me fulfilled, not to have any laments, regrets, and live a more full. I've learned to live a more fuller life.
Interesting.
Because of that.
And so have you seen that? Like, I mean, in your front row seat of working with people who are at the end of their life, and we always think about that, right? And that's something we think about all the time, of like this really important last moment we think about of on the deathbed. When I'm on my deathbed, I don't want to have regret. Is that something that you actually, is that just like, is it a myth in some ways? Like, should we be living our life for that final moment? To like, how important is that final moment before you go, opposed to just like the moment we're in right now? Should we be living to have no regret? Like, why is that important? What's your...
I think that's a little complicated, and I'm not exactly sure. But for myself, I'm trying to be a better person. I'm trying to do more for other people, and yet still trying to improve myself, etc. I had a patient who would only sleep with his bomber jacket because he was in World War II. This was important to him. This was what he remembered as part of his life. And naturally, we didn't take it off. We washed around it. We did all sorts of things. And he said to me, he says, Paula, he said, because we became very close. Oh, that's another thing in hospice. You become very close to the patients virtually immediately. The barriers are down. I could have made a fortune blackmailing family members. I knew so they would, the patients would tell me stories like, "Were whoa, interesting," and we would, tease about it because they wanted someone to vent to, and it was fascinating. So I learned a lot of things. And with this gentleman, he said to me, "Paula," he says, "my biggest regret," he says, you and I, we should have go on a trip to Alaska." He says, "I didn't." He said, "I didn't do that," and he says that was what was important. I said, "Actually, that would have been fun, to have done something like that." I had another patient who her biggest thing is that she wanted her daughter married, her elder daughter married and settled. She was uncomfortable with her not being settled. And it turned out that, and we became very close. I even followed her home and did volunteer work with her. And after she died, her daughter ended up getting married, and she asked me to come to the wedding. I was a stand-in for her mother.
Oh, wow.
How touching is something like that.
So you get very close.
You get very close, and sometimes we have to negotiate things. Like I had a Holocaust survivor who, when she went home, I followed her home there. When she died, now as in the Jewish practice, you don't really do cremation, at least especially in Orthodox. She wanted to be cremated.
Yep.
And her reason is that she didn't understand why she survived. She wanted to be in sympathy with all those who went before her, and she wanted cremation. And she says, "If I die, I hope it's warm weather," because she remembers being in a concentration camp, how cold it was, and she didn't want anyone to suffer. I relayed this with a discussion with her son, who absolutely refused.
Interesting.
And
she was Orthodox?
She wasn't.
No, but they still.
But still,
it was taboo for
no,
them.
they weren't. But it was taboo for him, and he refused to do it. She didn't know that, of course, and she was buried on a very cold day in the cemetery, so she didn't get any of her wishes done, unfortunately.
Isn't that up to her? Or,
no, not if you have given someone power of attorney.
Before or after the decision is like if you had something written when you were of sound mind.
Right, but I don't think it was formalized. And that's another important thing. If there are some wishes that you want and you should formalize it and make sure that your power of attorney or whoever you give the right to will follow through with your wishes. That's huge. I think a fun one that I had was with a HIV patient who had a very alternative lifestyle, very alternative lifestyle, and he was estranged from his father, and he was quite morose on the campus, on the unit.
Yeah.
And they said, "Paula, go in there, try to talk to him." Because sometimes we would read to patients. Sometimes people wanted scripture, which I'm not good at, read to them, or songs. I don't sing, etc. And he didn't look in my direction. He wouldn't talk to me. And for some reason, he was heavily tattooed all over the place. And I looked at him. I said, "Oh my gosh, that's spider web's work, isn't it?" And that's because I worked in an arts college, and I purchased a lot of books on tattooing and tattoo art and various cultures, and spider web was very famous in the 60s. I said, "Is it?" And he looked at me and he smiled and he says, "Yes, he was my good friend. And you should have seen me. I was lifting up his legs, flipping him around, doing all sorts of things." I said, "Oh, let me look at that, look at that." And we became really good buds.
Oh, well, so you found it.
Right. I found a connection again, and I just admired the artwork, which was amazing. And when his father did come in on the unit towards the end, I made sure I stayed with the stepmother so the father and him could have this time together, and they resolved a few issues. I kept her out of it. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, well, it was heartwarming that I was able to do that.
As I'm thinking as you're talking about this, like that setting, right? It's like if you're thinking of life, let's say like a TV show or a movie, right? This is the end. It's
Yeah.
like, consistently, if you're only eating the frosting on the cake, right? So it's like you're constantly, as people are coming and going, but you're there at this end period where emotions are high, it's intense, dramatic, right? It's like a consistent conclusion of somebody's story. And I think people, I was going to ask this as well, as people look at hospice, right, as one of like the more intense jobs that somebody could have. People ask me, say, how do you do that as a therapist? You're working with people with addictions. How do you do it?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
my answer is pretty much the same as someone who asks whether it's a police officer where you're dealing with very dramatic ER nurse, whoever else. And even for those of us who are in those types of professions, I think most of us would look to hospice and be like, "How do you do it?"
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of people are thinking that
Well,
or
I
asking
could I
that.
could say that to
Yeah,
you. I mean,
yeah, that's
how
what
do
I'm
you, how do
saying.
you do, how do you do what you do?
Yeah,
You have these skill sets. You found out that you can do it. You found out that in your case you're very good at what you do, and I just hope I am. I hope I'm there for them, and I have been, and I truly believe that it is, I'll say, a blessing
yeah,
where I have been with people when it counted,
mm,
and I've been people where I was able to hold their hands at the last moment and be with them at their last breath, and that's an honor and a privilege.
yeah, yeah. I get chills thinking about that. I mean, again, there's just the.
I'll shave you, Ev. I can bathe you. I'll take care of you, my friend.
I know. Well, hopefully, it doesn't happen too soon.
Yeah,
You're
no.
given the
Well, I can
differential.
do it now.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, yeah, if necessary. But the yeah, but and I guess that would be the question of, and I guess I already know the answer. Someone who does this, because people ask me as well. Okay, how do you work with people who are in their trauma and hearing, and again, I hear some of the saddest stories, and I'm in the room with them. I'm, as a therapist, there you can't fully shut off your emotion. You can't be a good therapist if you completely shut down, right? You can't be. It's not like being a surgeon. There's some element of that, right? I can't turn on the empathy all the way and feel it, but there has to be like at least a little bit of a filter there so that I don't take it home with me and that every day is not like a
Well,
dramatic emotional
well,
experience.
we sometimes need a counselor for ourselves if we've been
Hmm.
patients that have really touched us,
Yeah.
especially children. And I do not do well with children, so I know my limitations.
Yep.
And we have a whole branch
Oh,
that
for
deals just
children.
with
Yeah. Yeah.
children. I don't do well with children. I
Really.
have had that, but we have had counselors. We go in there, we're upbeat, we're happy, and we walk out and we're like,
Oh,
oh God,
geez.
and tears and everything. But you have to maintain a level of professionalism
Yeah.
with that. And that's another thing in terms of boundaries is we have to be careful to not become friends or emotionally or excuse me romantically
Oh,
involved
well, that'd
or
be a bad.
think yeah
That'd be a bad emotional investment.
yeah but you do there's transference,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so you have to be very careful about this, and yeah.
Are children on the unit that you're at,
Not
or
many. We have a specific unit for that.
yeah, and you kind of just don't, you
I
try to.
can't, no, I can't do it. We've had a couple children. I once had a infant who was a twin, and one was
Yeah,
really, yeah, one twin was healthy, one was not,
yeah,
and I had to rock this child, just and
right.
that was difficult. We've had another young one, and I don't, I know my limitations. Children are not what I'm good
And
at.
so when you got on, you tried, and
Oh,
then just yeah,
absolutely.
and it just
You do
wasn't.
what you
Yeah,
do what you have to do. Is it something that I'd want to do more? There's some hospice volunteers and personnel that do very well with children. That's not my strength.
yeah,
That's not
yeah.
my strength.
So what kind of, I don't know if it's the same applies to being a therapist, but who is the person, whether it be doctor, nurse, anyone on that the care team and working with this population? who again are in these situations where it's like the most dramatic moment potentially of somebody's life. The very end, the end of the story, the last page of the book, right? For every single time. And you said, you have to have boundaries, but you also said that there's this immediate connection. You immediately become very close to these people in their most vulnerable time. What kind of person is able to do this and who is not?
I've learned the power of silence, which is
You
maybe a
have?
little bit
In your
shocking
professional life,
Yes,
right? Not just personal.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, but I've learned to be quiet and sometimes just be in that person's space and allow them to be free flowing. I keep in mind that everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And you don't know what the story is. And I don't prejudge.
Mm-hmm.
I go in there, it's a blank slate. You tell me what you want me to know. You tell me what you want me to do.
Yeah.
And if it's in my power, I will do it. If we keep going, getting closer and closer, if we see each other, on a continuous basis, that's wonderful. And we can become closer and closer. And they may then feel comfortable enough to ask you to do certain things for them.
Sure.
Or to negotiate certain things. I had a family member, and it was a loving, loving family, but she was a German Scottish and he was Mexican.
Mm.
And she said, please tell him. And it was a wonderful relationship. She says, please, please, please tell my husband I don't want a Mexican funeral. And if you ever have been to a Mexican funeral, which I've been to a numerous, she says they're jumping in the casket. They're screaming, they're
like,
yelling.
Dios mío.
Oh, yeah, and she says, please, 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 just leave
So I
me.
want it to be quiet.
Yes, I want it to be quiet. So there's situations like that where you can help to negotiate, or at least bring up the topic which they were uncomfortable discussing with their spouse in this particular case.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we can do things like that. We've had people who were fighting over and this is a mother's belongings while she was actively dying in the bed. We've had to call security because
I would imagine there's some dramatic.
Family dynamics
Just the vultures come out, huh?
Oh yeah.
It's always money too, isn't it?
Or things. Yes.
Yeah.
Money or specific things. Or they bring up, oh, she always loved you more, and I didn't get this, or this, I was abused in this particular way. It's always something. But if it gets to the point, well, please, let's take it out of the room.
Yep. Yeah. And I can only imagine that, for these family members too, right? And I deal with a lot of clients, and it's always mom, dad, right? It's always the family of origin. And so for the family members, right, for them, it's maybe not the book ending, but for them, it's a chapter ending. And people have complicated relationships with their parents. So I would imagine it brings up a lot of emotion, whether they're extremely close or not at all. I would imagine there's very interesting dynamics that come into play
and it doesn't even have to be a family member. What if it is a person who has been an essential other for years?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. And, in this particular case, it was the woman who was actively dying. Her children came in and they told him, they pointed at him and they said, you're to be out of the house in a week. Mm-hmm. And you can't have this, that, and the other, and make sure you don't take blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it was huge. I mean, it was, first of all, the man was losing someone he loved. Now he's losing his home. He's whatever. There is, there's a lot of hurt and anger that can come up with in these situations.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away. Sometimes, it's like I said, it gets worse.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine just that environment, everything is amplified emotionally.
It is.
That's why I was wondering what kind of person it takes. It's, and again, I could say from my profession working with addiction, right? It's somebody who can keep their heart open, but not so much so that it takes them down emotionally. And people ask, well, don't you hear these stories? I mean, it's got to affect you in some ways. Yeah, every once in a while, just like every once in a while, there's one where It just kind of stabs you. It broaches your armor.
Yeah. Well, every time I would come home, I'd have to lay down for about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Just to unwind and rethink things, etc. So yes, it can be very emotional,
Mm-hmm.
but I just hope I've done the right thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're someone who you don't have to do this. I mean, you're volunteering your
That's
time. I
true.
mean, even and for those of you just joining, we have Paula Epstein, who is a death doula, so someone who coaches families and loved ones through the death and dying process. And yeah, and you do this voluntarily. So what is it about it that you like so much that keeps you coming back despite all the how difficult it can be?
They like me.
Yeah,
I like to go where I'm needed.
yeah, positive
Yeah,
validation.
I'm expensive labor.
Yeah, well, that's why other people. Why do you
Yeah,
do
yeah,
it?
yeah. No, I find it very fulfilling. It really has,
Mhm.
and some of the people, I have gotten incredible letters, from people of thanks, and each one of those really it touches your heart. I have had the opportunity, not lately, of course, where I used to go to a lot of the funerals of people I became very close
Yeah.
to, and to perhaps memorial services. And it was funny at one where I became very close with the family, and oh my God, did I love this man? He was the patriarch of the
Mm.
family. Oh, full of life, full of love. And when I walked in, and you know how family usually sits up front,
Mm.
I just usually kind of slip onto the back and
Yeah.
sit down.
Yeah.
I was, they screamed my name and they said, "Come up front." And all these people, all these relatives and friends said, "Who is this
Who?
woman?
Yeah.
Who is
I
this
don't know
woman?"
her.
But I always come in wearing my lanyard with my
Oh,
name
okay.
tag and
Mm.
things. I never go anywhere without it. I am a member of an organization and I'm
Mhm.
representing them.
And they're
But
okay. The organization's
oh
fine.
yeah, oh no, they're pleased
Yeah.
with that. Whatever I can do.
Mhm.
No, they're not against that. Uh, but no, it's just like you are considered, and this is just a matter of a couple of weeks out of someone's life, a
Yeah.
big part of the family, and it's embracing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's embracing.
So, I mean, as someone who's there and the final moments, the final page of somebody's life, for the rest of us, what matters? What really matters? I mean, from you're hearing people open up. I would imagine there's some credible insight that could be drawn from that. It's like because people, ask, okay, well, what do I chase? What matters? Is it money? Is it connections? Is it family? Is it accomplishments? Is it regrets? Like what matters most? Where should we be investing our time and
Oh,
energy? Um,
I can't. Want to give me some money, babe?
I
No,
pay you for that insight, honestly.
no, I really can't answer that because it's so individualized.
Okay.
But what I have found is that I think what's important is family and relationships and good quality ones.
Okay.
I
That's
would
fair.
like to feel loved at the end, and and someone says, "Paula, job well done.
Mm-hmm.
You raised a good family. You were,
Mm.
your family members loved you and cared about you, and you cared about them. That's me. This is what's important to me at this stage of the game."
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, so
so that's what
I
you.
could really only speak for myself.
Sure. And there any what are the regrets that people?
Oh yeah, there is, and it's
Yeah.
usually
What?
surrounded by family relationships.
So okay. So
Yeah,
that's
we're going back to that.
yeah.
Family
I
relationships.
wish I would have
Yeah,
been
right. Or
closer
I
with my
shouldn't have worked so
daughter.
hard. I should have spent more time doing this. I
For you
should have traveled.
workaholics out there.
Yeah, I should
Uh,
have traveled a little bit more. Can we do that now?
so experiences too, or traveling experiences,
Right,
and I've heard that
right.
too. It's like don't collect things, collect experiences.
Don't. You must
Oh,
have been
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
you must have been speaking to my daughter. She's telling me to get rid of my collections.
Yeah, if we
Stop
could
it.
see the rest of this table.
Yeah, oh, shh, be quiet. Yeah.
Yeah, and so for anyone who's just joining, it looks like we have about 80 people in and out who
Oh,
are watching this
okay.
right now, so that's
Okay.
pretty awesome. And
Well,
that goes to show that people are really interested in this. And so for those just tuning in, we have Paula Epstein, who is a death doula who helps coaching families through the end of life process. So please, if you have questions, as we're starting to come to the end, I would love to see more questions about hospice care, family. So any questions that you all have, feel free to lay them out there.
yeah.
You want to say something?
Could we spend just 1 minute about
Whatever you
something?
want, yeah.
Thank you.
Whatever you want, yeah. We're
That's
good.
really important to me. I think it was amazing work being done by Elizabeth
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, okay.
Yeah, she wrote about the 5 stages of death. And they don't
Okay.
go in any kind of order, and sometimes you skip a stage.
Yeah.
But she identified them. And it's denial,
Oh, yeah.
denial,
Yeah.
anger, bargaining.
Mm-hmm.
I should have done this, should have done
Yeah.
that. I'll do this if you give me several more months of life.
Yeah.
Depression, and
Mhm.
that's very common. Then acceptance, which is kind of the hardest, that you're accepting that this
Yeah.
is going to happen to you. She then adapted that with another man, and his name is David Kessler.
Yeah.
And they did the 5 stages of grief using these.
Yeah, that's how I've heard it, as the 5
Yes,
stages of
right.
grief. And so it was
And-
originally, she came up with it in regards to death.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So they co-wrote a book together. He added a 6th one.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
What's that?
And his is meaning, is trying to find meaning in what you're doing. And I think that this is for anyone who has some interest in it. This is a very fascinating, book. And he even has some videos out on that and trying to find meaning, in your life. So he does that for grief. And especially grief is a difficult thing. It's so situational, and it changes with each person. You may grieve immediately. Maybe it hits you a year later, 2 years later, whatever. There is no timetable on this, and you just have to know this.
Mm-hmm.
And let it go. Right. And I think
do most people hit it in this order? Like,
no.
is it...
Oh, no. It goes in any order. It skips an order or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that what's really important that come out of it, it says it helps you by empowering yourself. It helps you so that grief doesn't cripple you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's essential. And most hospice organizations, it doesn't matter if someone died in that organization or not, have free grief services.
Yeah.
And I think that is so essential for people to take, is to try to find a grief group if they've suffered a loss. That's huge.
Yeah. And by default, like, I'm not, as a therapist, we don't really get specific training in grief and loss, but I mean, it's something that comes up and you get thrown into, and I've talked with people who identify themselves as grief therapists, and they've helped me learn a lot about it and helping clients through. And some of the things that I've learned, I could think of one time where being in the community and working in sober living. And there's a lot of other sober living homes, and I work in that industry, and I manage homes, and there's an organization, and the word's gotten out that, like, within that, I'm one of the few people who's actually a therapist, and that I will work with some of their clients, and we've had these situations where people have died in the homes, and so one time a sober home owner had one of their residents die of a heroin overdose, and a couple of the other residents found this individual. And right, these are folks who are in a more vulnerable place. They're newly in recovery, and they found their friend, dead. And this is obviously going to be a very dysregulating, disrupting thing for a house. And the fear too is that, right, we have all these other people there that are one step away from that. Right, there's a very thin layer of protection between you and emotionally and that next drug or use, and especially right now, it's life or death. But anyway, they wanted me to come in and do a grief group, and at first I'm just like, oh God, like it's the last thing I want to do. But and I consulted with some of my friends on it and had some ideas, and people who've worked more on grief and loss, and helped come up with some good topics and ideas. And so going in, I mean, some of the things that we did was, just starting off like, okay, hey, let's get to know each other. Let's talk about our experiences of loss. And even the sober home managers there talking about the loss of his daughter, and people got to talk about their losses. Then we got to talk about the individual, and when did you meet him? What was tell some funny stories, right? And it becomes, and I think we have these built-in forms, I've realized, of getting over grief and loss, like within our rituals, and that's why some of our rituals are there, right? The funeral in and of itself, right? We laugh, we cry, and that helps get the emotions out and processing it, because I think where a lot of people seem to go wrong is they hold it in, right? That's that avoidance. We talked about denial of death, but that translates into denial of feelings and emotions. So in those rituals, in that coming together, is where some of the healing starts and begins.
Plus, yours was a different situation. In
Yeah.
ours, it's kind of expected, okay?
Yeah.
And maybe it's natural next step.
Yeah.
Yours was, a tragedy.
Yeah.
That happened immediately. So the grief is somewhat different,
And
and you have to handle it a different way.
Oh,
It wouldn't be
interesting.
it wouldn't be the same. I mean, there's a part of the normality
Yeah.
in terms of how you do grief therapy, but there's also it was a tragedy. It was sudden. It was unexpected, and that's huge. As a matter of fact, this David Kessler, who I alluded to, his son died of a heroin overdose.
Interesting. He sounds familiar.
That's kind of interesting in how he perceives the whole concept of grief. And you were talking about funerals. You mentioned that, and I would like to state something about that.
Yeah.
A lot of times you don't know what to say at a funeral. You're uncomfortable. Sure. You go up to the ones that are left behind. Yeah. What do you say?
Yeah, I never knew what do you? Okay. It's like, sorry for your loss. Okay. And it's like, are you sick of hearing that? Or it's like awkward for everyone.
It is awkward.
Like,
well,
for both sides.
It could be. But you can do a number of things. I can tell you some of the things not to say.
Sure.
Is don't say they're in a better place, because they're not, because the person is missing them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who cares where they are? I want them here.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't say that, you could always marry again.
Oh dear God.
Oh yeah. Or
maybe that's a conversation for later.
If you lost a child or you miscarried, you could have another one.
Yeah, that's a big one, and I could even feel I've seen that situation where I feel tempted to say that, right? Because maybe we minimize that loss of a miscarriage. Like, well, look, this is not a full-fledged person. They're replaceable. We'll get you a new puppy.
No, there's a whole emotional baggage that goes along with that, and I mean, the woman carrying this child is there. It's there. It was a part of them. I think that also it's important to just say, I'm sorry. And you are. I'm very sorry. Is there anything I can do?
Sure.
Or call them a week later and say, oh, do you need some laundry done? Do you need your car taken care of? Say, is there something practical I can do for you to make something easy for you?
Yeah, and that's great. And there's something I noticed too, and it's always surprised me whenever I go to funerals. And I mean, I've been to some ones with some tragedies. Like I was at one recently, especially now being in the addiction community. It's just like one thing after another.
Yeah.
And there was one really tough one where this was about a month ago. A guy who was like in my community. I was acquaintance with him. He lived in my neighborhood, so I'd see him time to time, and he was close friends with some of my close friends. I wasn't like particularly like his best friend or anything like that, but and he'd been sober for a long time, like maybe damn near a decade, And he was doing these amazing things and getting his PhD and had like a TED talk. And I mean, this was, one of these really dynamic kind of guys. And no one really saw this coming, but they just found him dead in a parking lot.
Yeah.
And, like pretty much had to have been over. As a lot of times you don't know.
Well, your body implodes, as you know, your body implodes if you try something even a minimal amount after you've been clean. Yeah.
And so I went to the funeral, and it's like, okay, so here's like a 30-year-old guy who has everything in the world. He has a fiance, his parents, just the place was packed. And I've always noticed this, like, it seems like some of the people who are the closest, I don't know if they're just like in a state of shock, and I'm sure sometimes they'll cry for a little bit, but I'm always like shocked. I'm like, how are they even like functioning? Like in those moments, I think almost they're in such a state of like shock, and then you have all these people around you, so you're constantly like maybe distracted, or you're always like trying to make sure everything's going well. But I would imagine it's just like once that all is over, right? The ritual, once all the rituals are over, then everything's quiet. And that's when I would imagine, like when you said call 8 days later or something, that's when I would imagine they really need the support, because it's just like you get all this huge support, and then it's kind of
all the food comes in, the baskets, the flowers, and all that, and guess what? It's over. Let's think about that person a little bit further down, and just give a call. Thinking of you, I'm here for you. Is there something you need? I'm there day or night. There's another thing, and there was a book, and I just loved this little book. It was called Don't Ask for the Dead Man's Golf Clubs. I love this book. It gave you hints about what to do and what not to do. And you'll find that sometimes during the funeral, or even as people are actively dying, say, well, he promised me this. She said I could have that. And where is the diamond ring that blah, 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 said. So that's another thing. If it's written down in you may hit, people don't know what's promised, what's not promised. Don't bring it up.
Yeah,
this is just it's just so inappropriate, to be doing that and starting to ask for things and like cleaning out the house already, and that may be another thing. Cleaning out a house is a major activity, and maybe you could say, do you need help with this? I can bring you boxes. I can bring you bags. I can take things to Goodwill or Salvation Army. I am there to help you. Maybe you give hours where you could be there. I will do this for you. You tell me.
I imagine it's a big emotional component.
It is. It is. I've cleaned out a couple of houses. Let me tell you,
you learn a lot about a person, right?
Well, that's another thing.
I would imagine you find some where you actually find the skeletons and what's on their hard drive.
Well, and especially I just want to warn people with tattoos. When we're bathing you, we see them, and if you have piercings in all sorts of locations, we find they're there. Just something to think about.
That's so funny.
Yeah,
and so for everyone just joining, if you have any questions about end of life care, hospice, grieving families, feel free to throw those out there. But we got some really good comments of people. Someone asked a great question. Is there one patient that stands out to you, like one in particular, a favorite patient, or a particular story that really stands out to you in the work you've done?
There are several. There was several. There was one man who was schizophrenic, but he was a real. Well, actually, all the ones that I've mentioned beforehand have been close to my heart, especially standing in for someone for their wedding. But this man was interesting. He was a musician in a New Age band, and it was very alternative. And they would put up clocks, and you can do anything in your room. The room is yours. So he had clocks all over the walls. They would bring up his keyboards and other musical instruments surrounding the bed. and the his musician bands and his fans, and we had to keep out a lot
Oh,
of
really?
his
So he
fans.
had
Oh yeah,
fans
he
and
had a
all that.
oh yeah, and he had his CDs. As a matter of fact, his CDs were his band members gave hospice a bunch of CDs that the band had created, and the fans would come in and they were like Devo or whatever. They were in all sorts of costumes at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. At hospice, you have 24/7 access.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And some members, remember, COVID's a little bit different. You have
Yeah.
to check with that. You can sleep over, be with them, whatever. And his fans would come in the most interesting costumes where it looked like there was electrical uh, turbines and
Oh
things
my
and
God.
whirlybirds coming in.
Yeah.
He was very memorable, for that. And we've had some New Age people where we've had New Age ceremonies where there's chanting and you put rose petals all over, the bed. And there was a really cute lady, and her husband, they were adorable, and she was actively dying. And a lot of times when you're in hospital, you're uncomfortable with your clothes on you. It
Interesting.
bothers you, or you're hot and you're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And ice chips are real big. And he would come, and the two of us, we would come into. This was during with Michael Jordan's heyday, so I would come in with ice chips, and she would be throwing off her clothes, and she would be doing all sorts of things. So we would take ice. She would be spilling ice all over herself. And then I said, okay, let's make a basket. So she's throwing ice. And I said, you're Michael Jordan. And then the husband came in. He says, what is going on here? And so she turned to him. She says, we're cooling off our passion for you. So I mean, it's just you accept things. I had a very interesting man with Alzheimer's, and his sons were big, strapping policemen that would come in with their guns, and they would come in, and they would come in, and they were mortified by Dad because he had Alzheimer's. And so Dad and we would be sitting there, and we were doing things. We were building shells. So I just went along with him. I'm building things, handing him lumber, and he's building things, and he's telling me what he's creating. And he says, I'm going to go out and shoot a bear. And I says, well, let's do that. So we're out there and we're shooting bears, and the boys walk in and they look at us, and he was so engaged, where normally a lot of people with Alzheimer's are depressed because they're angry because they have no control of themselves. And we're just doing things, and we're laughing, and we had the boys join in, and they were like, whoa. Yeah. And you see, and that's what I mean about being non-judgmental. They're close to the situation. You and we were close to Dad and Grandpa. I'm a step removed.
Yeah.
I can play along.
Yeah.
And we do that, and just to make everything comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are. Oh, I have so many.
Yeah, I'm sure you have stories.
Oh yeah,
for
I
days.
do. Oh yeah, I've had where the patient, sometimes they get very tired at the end and they sleep a lot. And when family members come in, they bring in food, and some of them don't eat, and we have to be careful that they don't, they shove it in their mouth, and that they don't pocket it and choke. So we have to clean out their mouths or watch it. But I had a family member, the wife was so furious. She came there, and when she comes there, he is to be up and communicating with her and talking. I caught her slapping him. Physically slapping him. Wake up, talk to me, I'm here, and you need to eat this, and this, I made this for you, etc. I had to call the charge nurse, come in, and we had to take her out.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
So,
So you're an advocate.
Those like elder abuse situations. I'm sure there's a lot of that.
That too. So
Yeah.
the main thing is that we're advocates for the patient. The same thing with end of life doula. We will do all these other things for families and friends, but it's the patient that's the central aspect of this and the key, and that's who
Wow.
we're there for.
Wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This was asking before some of the ethics, or like the code of ethics. And we have that too, right? In medical, putting the patient first and what's in their best interest, and you're there to support the families. But at the end of the day, right, it's about the patient. So, yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, thanks for that question. It brings back wonderful memories. I have
yeah,
so many. We could be here for hours.
yeah. I mean, you could write a book, I'm
Yeah.
sure, with some of these, memories and stories, and I've noticed that too, where it's I think. Especially in society, we think about these people that we venerate and look up to in their lives. But I've found that people just like your regular Joes, have pretty incredible stories
Yeah.
and amazing things that you could learn from them. And people are just fascinating, whether it's
They
Joe
are.
the plumber or
You have to listen.
yeah,
You just have to listen and let them tell their story. I mean, we've had prima ballerina. We've had, very famous lawyers. We had an assortment of people, and yeah, and we've had some naughty people too.
oh yeah. Well, I would imagine. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, but
yeah, yeah.
I've always thought that is interesting when you're part of we'll just say we'll call them complicated individuals. Right?
Yeah,
When you go to
yeah,
a
yeah.
funeral and there's like 8 people there, and then people go on stage like, he was a complicated guy.
Yeah, very, very common. Yeah, yeah. We had a pimp on the.
Oh, you told me that
Yeah,
story once. You
yeah.
had
We
a
had
pimp on.
and his stable, a couple stable of his devoted ladies. They would come all the time and take care of their man.
Whatever that means. That's funny. All right, so I told you that I have a mystery question, and
Oh,
again
okay.
before we hop off, yeah, and so for those of you who are just joining, and this is being recorded too, so if you want to check this conversation out later, I will be releasing this on my YouTube and podcast and RSS feed as well. So we're talking about the death and dying process and end-of-life care, and with us we have Paula Epstein, who is a end-of-life doula, right, where she does a lot of coaching and guiding families through the process when they have a loved one with a terminal illness. So feel free to throw any questions out there for us in the last few moments here. But yeah, so my mystery question was there's an interesting Netflix documentary. I don't know if I'm sure someone's maybe brought this up to you, but it was kind of popular for a minute. But it was all about like, is there life after death? It was like a documentary. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you heard
I'm
about
not. I
this?
don't have
No,
Netflix.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'll have to send this to you. But it was interesting where they talked about there were people who were sharing
Hmm.
stories and
Hmm.
documenting stories of, and you hear about these things of people who were hovering over their body,
Hmm.
who came
Hmm.
back, who one of the big ones where they interviewed a hospice doctor who talked about starting this profession and then just noticing that like towards the end, people having conversations, seeing
Hmm.
their
Hmm.
relatives,
Hmm.
coming to peace towards the end.
Hmm.
So you hear these like pretty compelling stories of people having these almost supernatural experiences, and it makes you think. Um, yeah, have you seen? I mean, has that changed? And you did allude to it a little bit. I didn't ask you about it, but you mentioned having seen some things, right? Or um, that your perception of death and your fear of it has abated a bit. What happened? What do you think happens? What's your best guess? I mean, being around it all the time, have you
um,
seen any of these
yes,
experiences?
I have actually seen that, and especially when a 90-year-old is talking to their mother, who's
Mm.
supposedly right there stroking their
Yeah.
forehead, etc. Yes, I have seen that, and I have seen especially that's very close to the end, where
Mm.
they are seeing relatives or someone has come back to them or
Mm.
talking to them, where they are talking to somebody.
Is that
The
in their
answer,
head? Is it? I mean, is it?
I that
We just don't know, right? That's in
I don't
their.
know, but there are various organizations
Mm.
that do that. Especially there is one out in New Mexico that just had their annual meeting and the conference
Yeah.
on near-death experiences, and a
Yeah.
lot of that comes out at that point. So there are organizations and conferences on that very particular topic. It intrigues me, but I'm not fully engaged in understanding that. I have seen it, I have heard it, where people do talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, or as I said, they've come out of the bed and were actually reaching for someone, or they were standing by their window in the evening and looking up and having a discussion.
Wow.
Yeah, so I've seen that. I can't explain it, but you just gently guide them back to bed.
Yeah.
I'm not knowledgeable enough on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's things that I witness. There's something out there. I think there's something going on.
So yeah, I mean, if you had to put your money on it, so to speak, or just from what you've seen, and you're not necessarily a particularly religious person, from what I know. I mean, right? I mean, you're not super religious or anything, but
I wish I had more information, because that would be a comfort to know that there's someone out there for you, or someone that you loved is going to be there for you when you transition.
Well, I guess it's like my biggest fear. I think a lot of us is it just black and that and and that's.
I know. Like I said, I've seen so many people just go like you're going to sleep, and it's very comfortable. They breathe, they have sleep, like apnea. They're breathing very hard and heavy, and then all of a sudden, that's it.
Yeah.
So it's like, just to me, I that's how I view it. Just kind of going to sleep, and if it's done peacefully, and all of a sudden everything is relaxed, etc. It's a wonderful thing.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I think about that way.
Yeah.
So if any of your patients added you to their will or tried any, when is that part of like that?
No,
you could probably be a pretty rich woman, like everyone. It's like, I hate both my daughters. You get everything. You get you get the whole trust fund.
Yeah. No, there's boundaries. No, we're not allowed. People have wanted to, give me money and things like that. No, I can't accept that. What happens, and this is a big problem with hospice, and I'm sure the other hospice practitioner knows it, they feed you. Families bring you food nonstop, or they have parties for you as thank you, or they donate to the organization. And that's fine. It's a danger to go on the unit. You'll find also, and going around holiday time is very scary. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Jesus. So yeah, well, I don't know. Was there anything else that while we have folks here, and that you wanted them to know about this process, or you think it's important for them to know, or about working with a doula, or anything?
I think I would like to just leave you with one thought that it really is meaningful to me and is a comfort to me, is that I feel, if you think about someone you loved but you lost, you never really lose them. They're there with you. They're a part of you.
Wow.
And I kind of go by that philosophy. And I do try to think about people. They're in your heart and in your soul. You haven't lost them. They're just not with you physically.
In the physical realm.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Just transient, and it's one of those things that I don't know what could be more natural than dying. Like it's as natural as anything else.
Well, it's hard to live if you think about it. Isn't it hard to live every day? Isn't it hard to live? When someone says it, it's sort of funny. When I go in on the unit, you already, when I go in there, I'll say, "Oh, hi, sunshine." I don't say, "How are you feeling?" I know how you're feeling. You're feeling like caca. Okay, so I never even approach that. I always say, "Hi. Did you sleep well?" Something like that. And the same thing with someone who is ill. Don't ask necessarily how they're feeling. They'll tell you when they want to tell you, but for the nurse or the CNA or doctor, that's when they tell you how things are. But sometimes they like to hide their feelings, you know. But as I said to them, I had one cute lady. I'd come in one day and I brought her her morning cup of coffee and juice, and she says to me, "Oh shit, I'm still here." And I said, "Yeah, yes you are. Yes you are." And I said, "Every day that you're breathing is a blessed day for me to see you."
That's so fun.
Oh, and pardon me for any bad language.
That's all good.
I was quoting someone.
Yeah, as long as you're quoting
That's
someone,
right.
that's a
I was
loophole
quoting someone.
for our angelic language policy here.
Yes, yes.
Well, awesome. Well, yeah, I think that's it. And I appreciate everyone tuning in, and people had some really complimentary and thanking you for what you do. Someone really early on had asked, where can you find, how do you find a death doula to help you through that process? Where can you find one?
Three organizations that I can tell you about, or actually two organizations and one university, will have a list of those that have outboarded from their classes. So they would have a list of those. So those would be Lifespan, which is out of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Another organization is INELDA, which is the International End of Life Doula Association.
Okay.
They're another one. University of Vermont has a very active program, and they will have lists. But I'm also going to recommend that you Google End of Life Doula and your city or state.
Yeah.
City and state. Because these organizations, again, because of COVID, it used to be you would go on their campuses and learn to do this and shadow. We did everything remotely.
Yeah.
So, so people from all over the United States were taking the class rather than going in place somewhere. So I recommend Googling and your state.
Okay.
Yeah. And a life Google. Yes.
Yeah, and are more places, is this becoming more recognized? Like kind of in like the addiction world, it's becoming more and more common for like peer recovery specialists. And it is like a certification and training. It is like a general recovery coaching. But now you're seeing more of the insurers, states actually offering reimbursement for these services, right? Because it is someone who like is a peer, fills in the gaps, not fully 100%, kind of spans the line from support person to professional and rides this like important middle line. Is there more awareness? Are you finding, are any of these services covered or going to be covered?
That I don't know. If for sure, I don't think, because it's not nationally certified, so far it's not covered by insurance. I don't know about people who have long-term service, insurance policies, whether something like this is considered. Yeah, I don't know this.
Yeah.
So I'm not up on that, the legality of it. But will I say, is it increasing? I'd say yes, because there's more articles about it. People are more vocal about it. There seems to be a need for it. I mean, New York Times had a very interesting article about it, So there seems to be a need for something like this because we don't live near our loved ones. And to me that's big. Or your loved ones are busy. You may need someone like this. Plus, this person is a buffer. This person can help make and we didn't really touch on this, but legacy projects. I'm not arty. This wouldn't be something that I would do, but maybe compile a list of favorite recipes to pass on for generations. Perhaps they can do artwork or video or storytelling. And that's another thing, if you go to a funeral, is that why not give the people who've lost someone your memory of that person. This is one more thing that they can grasp onto and remember. And so there's all these different legacy types of things that can be done, with a doula and for a doula and by a doula. Like, for example, I actually helped with a letter that he wanted written to his loved one,
Yeah.
something he couldn't express himself. And and then had him. I typed it up and had him sign it, and the woman said, "He didn't really write this, did he? Did you write it?" No, I said, "No, no. This is what he said. I just took it word for word."
Wow.
Yeah. I don't believe he actually said these wonderful things. Yeah, no. He did. So, so we're like I said, we are a companion, we are a helper, and I think people need helpers.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's really interesting to see where I think with healthcare, I think we fell away from this holistic approach where everything was very 100% clinical, which is obviously important. That's why I think you're seeing the pendulum swing back a little bit
Yeah.
with these individuals who provide a professional service, but there's also a personal element to it as well, and not having necessarily been confined by these very rigid rules and
Right.
structures of healthcare delivery.
Mhm.
Just like we could say with your daughter who's done, birthing and now
And
with breastfeeding
breastfeeding
and having
and people who have hyperemesis. I mean, she has been an amazing counselor. Besides working her full-time, job as a professor on the campus and raising two young children, she amazes me.
mommy pride right here.
Mommy pride,
Yeah, well,
mommy
so we
pride.
go to the daughter for the birthing, and
That's
then we
right,
go
and
to
then
you
you
for
deal with the
death.
mother. That's right. Funny about
Yeah,
that.
you
Yeah,
could have
that,
hang a shingle
that's
together and be
right.
like,
No,
yeah,
she's amazing. She's someone you got to go over there and have a podcast on her. She's amazing.
I will, yeah, yeah, I'll
But I think
definitely
you're
have.
amazing too, and I'm so
Oh,
proud of
thank
you.
you,
I'm
thank
proud
you,
of
you're
you
sweet.
and the work that you do.
Oh, thanks so much. But all right, so that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for
Well,
being
thank
on,
you for
and
having
you
me.
did not disappoint, and I knew that people would be interested in this topic, especially people who follow me and are interested in mental health, and I think this is a really important part of mental health, and yeah, like I mentioned before, the just how much of our lives are dictated by the fact that we know that we're going to die. I mean, it's everything, and
It's
it's
inevitable.
never
It's an
it's
equalizer, isn't
inevitable.
it?
Yeah. Well, so I'm a fan of like boxing and MMA, and it's really
Mhm.
funny to hear like experts and announcers, right? Where it's like there's this life cycle in it where it's like fighters, like when you hit a certain age, right? It's going to take a toll, and some of the best boxers, right? If they stay in long enough, there's a life cycle that the young lion's going to come up,
Yeah.
and and they joke it's like Father Time is batting 1,000, right? Father Time has never lost, right? There's no one who's been able to beat, that, and that goes with aging. Um, so I think it's something that it is really important to talk about, and that we reduce some of the stigmas around it. Um, yeah, because I think it is such a big, and I think so much of our lives too. It's like there's this built-in structure of avoiding thinking about it, and I think that's got to be important to some degree because like if I'm going around just in the back of my mind, I'm gonna die someday. I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know. I'm gonna be gone, and I haven't had whatever that may be. Like that wouldn't be a good way to live your life if you're
No,
thinking
no,
about it all the time.
no. And there's nothing wrong with having some death denial.
Yeah, it's like you
Get on
can't
with your.
be in it
That's
all
right.
the time.
That's right. You got to go get on with your life and try to do good. And try, like I said, I've
Hmm.
tried to live without too many regrets and just keep on going. And
It's like yeah, and it's like
yeah,
don't worry about it until you need to,
that's right.
and
Yeah.
then so it makes sense. How do we reconcile those two? And that's with grief and loss. And when I work with people on that, that's kind of my personal model of working with people. Is like you have you have two worlds: the world of acknowledging, being in your feelings, processing, leaning into it, but then you have the world of moving on, right? And if you're just in too far into one and you deny the other, but if you just stay here and you are afraid to move on, it's like kind of this dynamic process of moving between both worlds, and hopefully you live in the moving on as much as you can. And the toll for that is to really acknowledge your emotions, process it, talk about those the rituals. So I think it's real important for sure.
Mm.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, let's end it there. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Miss Paula. We
Thank you.
appreciate that. And if anyone has any questions, just let us know. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Auntie.